honored to be here.
Oh, thank you.
Thank you so much.
Yes. Okay. Take it away. We're ready for the recording. And this is as engaging as you want it to be. But what I want you to do is frame it up. If you want to kick anything off, tell us about your organization, and then we get into some discussion type of questions. We can do it that way. Okay?
Absolutely, Lisa. Well, thank you so much. We do have some slides. We wanted to sort of provide just some, background, basic information about clinical research. So, as soon as you can provide me permission, I'll bring those slides up. Allison and I will walk through those quickly, and then we absolutely just want to, open this up for discussion with you folks. And so, in the meantime, while we queue up those slides, I'll just expand a little bit and say I've been working in clinical research for 10 years now with the same nonprofit organization, that's CISCRP, which stands for the Center for Information and Study on Clinical Research Participation, which is a mouthful and why we just say CISCRP. But we have been here and I've had the distinct pleasure of trying to make clinical research better for patients and the public. We do that by providing education, educational materials, as well as materials, generally about clinical research, but also those that go to people who are actually in clinical trials. That may be helping to make the process sort of more easy to understand for folks, providing information in plain language, as is what a health literacy director might do, or providing the results of trials back to participants who have been in a trial. And that's something that's important. We probably won't talk too much about it here, but it's one of the ways that we try to, again, provide the information that people need. The other part that CISCRP does, and it's something that we'll touch on and is very important, is working together with patients as well as people who are from communities, whether patient communities or communities that have not been well represented in clinical research, to understand their needs and to help partner with the companies that are doing research to, again, improve research, to shape research to better fit the needs of those people, those communities, those patients. So that's something that's really important to us. And again, something that we're going to touch on later is another way that you can make an impact as far as research goes and health goes, even without necessarily taking part in a clinical trial.
So I've granted you access, so you should be able to share your screen. Everybody, it's given everybody access, so don't hit share by mistake. You'll start sharing your screen. Okay.
No problem. All right, Allison, did you want to say any other words about yourself and your organizations? Because you're more than one.
Well, thank you for that. And thank you as well, Lisa, for the introduction. I think people can read my bio and get a feel for my passion for the work that I do. But in other webinars, I typically lead with the usual, my clinical research expertise and my credentials and such. But this time I made a conscious decision to lead with who I am as a person. I'm first and foremost a creative human being who loves interacting with people and connecting. And I just happen to have decided to use my talents in the realm of clinical trials. And the reasons behind my personal motivations to do this work and to participate in clinical trials have really never made it onto a resume. But it's there. It's in that nuance and the details that I find the most meaning. And I just hope that it offers all of you some additional insights as well as we have this discussion. And if you're wondering, yes, I do consider the fact that I have been a participant in over 20 studies as a flex. I am proud that my input and the data collected from me as a patient participant can serve a larger purpose.
Mm-hmm. Thank you for that.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I will pick up on slide 3.
Good.
What is clinical research? Clinical research, clinical trials are the process of scientific discovery that is carefully designed and carried out to answer specific scientific questions. Clinical trials are a subset of clinical research and the final step to finding out if new treatments or vaccines are being developed that can be considered safe, effective, and possibly even better than what is currently being used. Not all clinical trials involve exploring new drug compounds. Some clinical trials test new medical devices, for example. Other studies are simply observational by design. Next slide. So, why, you might ask, should clinical trials have diverse participants? Well, let's dig into that. The question as to why diversity matters has a simple answer. We should never assume that one size fits all. And there is abundant scientific data proving that people's metabolisms can vary. So how our bodies react to and process drugs, for example, can differ. Something else to stop and consider is the fact that the vast majority of medical interventions on the market today were never tested in people with our racial ancestry. Yet here we are being prescribed them and taking them anyway. I'm not comfortable wearing somebody else's shoes. I don't know about you. Our many instances of possible differences from biochemistry to environment to how our bodies process stress, all of those things justify further clinical trials that include our many subsets of human beings, i.e. diversity. And to bottom line it, we cannot expect to have better health outcomes than we currently have by sitting on the sidelines. What? Someone else is going to stand in for us? No, it just doesn't work that way. Next slide, please. So it goes without saying that diversity in clinical trials is critical. Let's be real. At the core of the issues is the fact that access to clinical trials is tied directly to the kinds of health outcomes we can have. Our health ultimately impacts every sector of our lives, everything, from longevity to quality of life and everything in between. Health affects how we live and whether we can enjoy what we have and whether that's equitable with what everyone else is doing and enjoying and having. To me, it is fundamentally a social justice issue. Diversity in clinical trials carries that much weight. Next slide, please. We can talk for a moment about the reasons for lack of inclusion. And for me, those reasons fall into two main categories. Let's face it, the lack of trust for the larger medical establishment and clinical trials more specifically is a major blemish that was well earned. Let's be upfront about that. But we also have to acknowledge that a whole lot about how research is conducted has changed. They have come out from the shadows and are required now to operate out in the open, those who design and conduct clinical trials. They have to do it in the light with transparency. There's a whole lot more transparency and accountability in the entire process. Nowadays, Tuskegee is mentioned, but it's often more about the fact that Tuskegee brought about informed consent. It's because of the whistleblower and because this was brought to light that we now have all of the rules and regulations in place that we have. Another issue, another reason for lack of inclusion is that currently this lack of inclusion in clinical trials can trace back to the effort being made to include us or not. The more pervasive reason for the gap in our participation, has a whole lot more to do with the fact that the message is not coming through to us. We often lack information about studies being conducted, what clinical trials are all about, and why it's so critical that we not be excluded. In far too many instances, industry has made assumptions about our participation. Are we willing? Are we not willing? That it's too costly, that it's too cumbersome, that we are unreliable patients, et cetera, et cetera. Nah, don't assume diddly about me and mine. Share the information with us. Make it make sense. And then let us make our own decisions about what is in our best interest. Don't speak for me. Another thing to point out is this information should also be shared with the populations that need it most. That means changing how industry packages it so that it's more digestible, more relatable, more compelling, and then place it within reach of our eyes and our ears. It's not rocket science. It's not that hard. The powers that be just need to try harder, if I may be blunt. In my experience and based on what I have observed, we can be very receptive to hearing about new opportunities to improve our own health and to extend our lifespans. What do you all think? Am I the crazy one?
Agree. Totally agree.
In terms of the history of mistreatment in clinical research, there's a whole lot to unpack about this tainted history. There's a lot there. It's crucial that we take a moment to acknowledge it and to check where the others are in their willingness to own this history. That's important too. I can't trust someone who downplays or minimizes anything. But especially major examples of exploitation, like the ones mentioned on this slide, that cannot be minimized. There has been a lot published on these things. There's a lot that can be read about. But again, I want to caution you against getting stuck there, right? It's great to understand it, to acknowledge it, but we have to create opportunities to change these outcomes and not cycle or circle in such a way that we are getting in our own way. We cannot afford to live there in that headspace. Nothing good can come of that. It's time to act, to rise up and demand more out of medicine, and to ensure that they can't say that we never showed up. Accountability is essential for all of us, for all stakeholders, us included. Doing more, going farther, and accomplishing more in medicine and healthcare requires data from all of us. Evidence-based medicine. Heard that term? Did you ever stop to think about where that evidence comes from? It's clinical trials. Next slide, please. Okay.
Allison, before
yes.
you move forward, there you go. I was going to get to your point number 3, but it's there. So go right forward. Okay.
Okay.
Will
No
do. All right. So folks, I mean, so many great insights that Allison has shared. And what I want to do here is sort of, take that step that we talked about, where what changes have been made? Why would you trust clinical research now or in the future? And so, as Allison said, some of the things that that have happened, as we some of which, there are definitely many more we just shared right now. Those have led to changes in how clinical research is done. It's led to new regulations, new laws. It's led to new guidelines, and there are different entities or different parts of the system of clinical research that are responsible. There's several different checks and balances to make sure that the safety of participants is as safeguarded as possible. And Allison's going to talk a little bit more about those different parts of the system a little bit later. The third point that Lisa was pointing to, the FDA does require now a diversity action plan for what they call pivotal clinical studies. pivotal clinical studies are the ones that are the biggest. They have the most number of people, and the objectives of those trials, the goals of those trials is to essentially gather the evidence that sort of proves that a treatment works and that it is safe enough for people to take. So those trials are supposed to have a plan that describes what the clinical research sponsors goals are for diversity. So essentially what proportion of individuals need to be from a certain ethnicity or a certain race or a certain gender. And then it's also supposed to describe how the sponsor plans to actually achieve those goals, which is absolutely critical, because that's the part where, and we'll talk about some of the different ways to do that, that's the part where essentially research sponsors have to put their money where their mouth is. And they have to say, well, sure, we have these goals, but this is the way that we actually have to achieve it. And Allison will tell you that the best way that they can put these plans together is to actually work with individuals from the communities to understand what are the best strategies for reaching out to that community, for educating that community about clinical research, for inviting them to participate in clinical trials. So it's a key thing that we have another slide at the end of this, which we can jump to later on, that has more details about the diversity action plan. But anyways, we're definitely going to share these slides so that you folks can all have it. And that'll have a link as well that can take you to the law if you want to nerd out like I do and actually read the law. But let me get to the next bullet point here, where researchers are working to improve access. So improving access means a number of different things. It's some of what we just talked about, some of what Allison just talked about, making sure that you are actually reaching out to communities, making sure that you are including them in the process of actually developing trials, that you're asking them, hey, what's the best way to reach out to you? Other ways to improve access to trials is to not have such strict criteria for who can be in a trial. Sometimes that is done for scientific reasons. Other times it has been shown that those are simply sort of restrictions that are there that researchers have and that aren't helping anybody. It's not helping to have more diverse participants. It's not helping to have just people getting into the trial in general, which slows down the process of developing medicine. So that's one way. And another way to improve access is just to make trials easier to participate in. That may mean fewer visits to the doctor. It may mean that you can have some visits be on the computer, telemedicine. It may mean providing compensation for your travel, providing compensation for your days off. It may mean providing compensation so you can have childcare or pet care or, whatever, a parent care if you are taking care of parents. Those are all parts of access that are critical. And I want to say that over the past 10, 15 years, all patient communities have fought just to make clinical trials more patient-centric. And now over the past few years, it has become sort of a higher priority, thankfully, for researchers that, hey, we need to be equitable about this. Meaning not everybody gets the same thing, but those communities that need these things more so will get them, as opposed to those who don't, right? So being more patient-centric was an absolute foundation to now becoming more diverse in clinical research, becoming more inclusive in clinical research. Thankfully, now we are seeing a lot of change where research sponsors are bringing in consultants like Allison. They're bringing in organizations like myself to make their trials more patient-centric, to make sure that they are trying to get more diverse people in there. They are actually research companies, believe it or not, hiring more individuals from those communities who have been underrepresented. They are trying to give more opportunity to research sites that are representative of those communities themselves. So a lot of investment. As always, we push for more, right? Allison will tell you that definitely, because we know, because we're so deeply in this, that there are people that are working so hard for this, but we also know that there are others that do lip service, right? So what all of this is, let me put it in a nutshell and say, You will find now that the situation in clinical research with regard to diversity is much better than what it was, and that's still not nearly good enough. And so all of us can be agents of change in whatever way that we can, whether that's participating in a trial, whether that's advising researchers on better ways to reach out to our communities, or, Allison and I consistently yelling at people and telling them they're not doing it enough. All right. So one of the ways that we've helped, hopefully, to make clinical research more accessible is providing educational information about research and making that information specific to each community that needs to be reached. And we do this through co-development, right? So we're not going to sit here and pretend like we know what any of these communities are going through on their own, whether that is the Black and African American communities or Hispanic and Latino communities, Asian communities, LGBTQ plus communities, Native and Indigenous communities, or even pediatric populations and caregivers for pediatric populations. The list goes on and on. And what we don't want to do is sit here and, first of all, just make one piece of information, one brochure about clinical research and give it to everybody. And secondly, if we are going to make information that's for each community, we're going to do it by working together with them. And so that's what we've done. We brought in experts to help with the initial drafting of every one of these. And then we did an anonymous 500-person survey that went to each of those individuals from each of those communities. And let me tell you, that co-development process helped us learn so much. And it was just absolutely invaluable. And the other part of it is, even though we've done this work, the work is not done yet, right? And so we always are open to receiving more feedback. If folks see something in our materials or they see that we have a gap, we want them to reach out to us and say, hey, this might be better, or have you thought about this? And so I offer that also to you folks. Please feel free to, whenever, reach out and, ask us why we did something a certain way and if we consider doing it different. Another way that we've tried to address the issues of access is to have accessible education about clinical research. We've done this particular type of more innovative, we call it boots on the ground event, which is a RV that we made into an educational exhibit. I'll show you some pictures now from the inside in a moment, but we've done this twice, in 2018, 2023. In 2018, we went to LA. In 2023, we went to Philly and Baltimore. And the focus was, again, reaching those communities who have been underrepresented in clinical research, providing them with general education about clinical research, and also inviting them to become part of the research process, not just by participating. This past year's iteration was done through a grant from the FDA's Office of Minority Health and Health Equity. And so another thing that we do is we share what we learned, right? And so we'll be sharing that. We have some reports that we put out. We do a lot of different reports and studies and gather insights. And all of that, we always try to have representative samples and share insights that are specific to different communities. And for this one, we found, as you might guess, that we were able to increase our engagement with those communities when we worked with individuals who were actually from those communities. So people who have been community educators, have been community advocates for years and years, and know what to do, like the back of their hand. They are absolutely instrumental in this type of work. And so if you folks consider yourselves to be those types of individuals, which I would say, based on this organization, the fact that you have these community focused talks and there's such a community focused resource really accentuates the idea that in order for research to be more welcoming and be more inclusive, we have to work together with those communities in order to do that. I'm not going to go through every point here, but I will just again say, those individuals who worked with us both before the events and at the events to help people learn about clinical research, they were absolutely critical in this process. And here you see on the left-hand side, the individual wearing the Journey to Better Health shirt in the back. That is Mama BJ. And in the Baltimore area, she is one of those individuals, I'm presumably probably just like Lisa is, who is just an absolute rock star in trying to improve the health of the community by sharing resources, by connecting them with resources, by being a mentor. And those are the types of individuals that we think are, absolutely at the crux of improving this issue of not having representation.
I do have a question before you leave the
Sure.
the journey and the experience.
Yes.
If our community wanted you to provide that for us, I
Mhm.
know you had a grant from the FDA, but
Mhm.
if we wanted you to come to Virginia and do something and partner with CBOs here, how would we do something like that?
Yeah. So we've been knocking on doors and, trying to get just the baseline funding. Again, we're a nonprofit, so any funding that we get goes right into these types of programs. So we've been knocking on doors and trying to get the funding in order to do that. We are applying for the next iteration of that FDA grant. So I would say, if there's interest, come to us early and often. And I do think that that is sort of the next geographic region that we need to go to. Right. We've done the Northeast, we've done the West, and by Northeast, I mean 2 cities in the Northeast and 1 city in the West. But I do think the Southeast is probably where we should go next. So we would love to take this thing all around the country. It's just a matter of, paying for the gas and appropriately compensating the community educators, because we don't ask them to just volunteer their time out of the goodness of their heart. What they're offering has tremendous value. And they should be compensated appropriately for their time.
Amen.
Next question before you go on. I just by using the emojis or hand raise, how many of you on the call have ever participated in a clinical trial?
Great question.
I see 1. Who else? Okay, that's 1. Okay. How many of you know somebody who has been a participant in a clinical trial? Okay. How many of you wish you had been asked or want to be asked to be in a clinical trial? Okay, there you go. Okay, so there's interest that's there to see. That's good. So the one thing that I want to say to our group right now is, now that you understand, and we'll get further in here maybe, about the FDA's requirement and the law that was passed, you can ask proactively if there's something you're interested in or want to see if there's an additional option. One of the things I like to say is, in certain health conditions, the next thing may not be a treatment, it may be a clinical trial. And you're just knowing that is important to know, that you can, now that you understand they're looking for diverse candidates and individuals, underrepresented populations to be in trials. Don't just, this is laying a foundation for us to feel comfortable, to understand the process. But we have to take it a step further and say, if I'm interested or have a family member who I want to have it, we can say, hey, send me some. Is there a clinical trial? I'm interested. If your doctor doesn't do it, I hope you all will tell us where to go to identify by therapeutic areas or disease areas where we can go to find those. So I'll be quiet, but I wanted to make sure we leveled into that. Okay.
Absolutely. No, and that's such
Great
a good
point.
point. Yeah, and it's something that I was saying to Allison, I I myself, I always default to, participate in trials only if it's right. And, diversity efforts are getting there, but they're not good enough yet. And there's other ways to participate. You don't only have to be in a trial, because, we want to be as non-promotional and unbiased about participation as possible. However, really critical to mention, it is an equity issue, because a lot of times there is not another treatment available, or there is not a treatment in general available. And in those cases, absolutely, individuals from any, community should be able to access, those treatments. And as a result of not being invited, and as a result of participation being so burdensome, particularly for those communities who have been underrepresented, they don't get access, and that is a big problem. And so thank you, Lisa, for really making sure that we are mentioning that. If a trial is right for you, you may have to fight a little bit to get into it, but you do have the right to get into it. Absolutely.
Mary, is your hand up, or was it in response to a question? Do you have a question to ask?
I do not. It was in response to a question as to
Okay.
who would like to do it.
Okay. All right. Great.
Yeah.
Thank you. Okay.
Yeah. It's such a good question. That's, what we see over and over again is individuals want to be a part of clinical research. They're just not invited.
Exactly.
Allison, did you want to give an overview of this slide?
Sure thing. So in terms of keeping participants safe, federal agencies, including the FDA and the National Institutes of Health, or NIH, do oversee and approve the conduct of clinical trials by researchers. So the study plans that are known as protocols must be reviewed and approved by the FDA even before any patients can be recruited and before any clinical trials can include humans. So all of that needs to pass the test. Is it safe? Then another group that helps to keep participants and other patients safe are institutional review boards, or otherwise known as IRBs. And those are sprinkled across the country, and they kind of live at various academic institutions that conduct research. And those add another layer of protection to help ensure that a clinical trial is ethical and that participants' rights are protected. And IRB has the authority to even stop a trial if they think, for whatever reason, that it's unsafe, or if it has not been fully or adequately explained to patients who are supposed to take part in it. Another thing to add is that researchers do now and forevermore need written permission from participants before enrolling them in a trial. Informed consent is a process of explaining what will happen during the trial, along with other details that can include how many visits are part of the study, what will take place during each of those visits, whether the patient will be asked to keep a study diary, for example, to collect more information from them. It can also discuss what happens to participants' data, as well as how much and at what points along the study patients will be compensated for their participation in the study. The consenting process allows people to ask as many questions as they want at the pace that they want. They also get to ask officials to clarify things all along the way. And it's also not a one-shot deal. It's not, okay, you've consented to this and it's over. Every time you are asked to create more data, to provide more information, you can consent to no longer be in the study as well. So you can stop participating at any point. And they just ask that if you do decide to no longer participate, that they be allowed to monitor you to make sure nothing untoward is happening. You're not just out there twisting in the wind by yourself. They want to be able to wrap things up with you. But having said that, being in a trial is a choice. And all clinical trial participants can stop being in a trial at any time and for any reason. And let's be clear, agreeing to be in a trial does not take away any rights. I've never felt in any ways taken advantage of, or that I'm signing away my rights when I sign an informed consent form. I ask a lot of questions. I write in the margins. I take notes. Sometimes they've had to leave the room and go ask somebody else because they couldn't quite understand, based on the way it was written, exactly what was meant. But I say that to say it drives the point home that you're in the driver's seat. Ultimately, as a patient participant, you are in the driver's seat. Okay. Other ways to get involved in clinical research and have your voices heard, all of our voices heard, include the following: patient advisory boards of various kinds with various companies and various organizations. I belong to one, for example, called the Patient Champion Network, which provides patient voice to a company called Medable. Another option is to become a patient advocate as part of an IRB. IRBs do include patients, not always enough patients in my estimation, but I'm on that crusade of more, must do more. Many research institutions have patient review boards that you might consider joining. You never know until you ask, right? That's the policy I live by. Another option that isn't on the slide is to offer your feedback to a group of questions on a certain topic or health condition by participating in focus groups. You'll get the chance to weigh in with your perspective, spend about 90 minutes or so, give or take, and get paid for your time. I participate, recruits for focus group participants as well, and for a lot of different topics on which you can lend your expertise.
Thank you, Allison. Yeah, and I'll just touch on the review panel point, because this is something that CISCRP has. We have a review panel that has hundreds of individuals in it, and periodically we will send them some material, some 8-page, 9-page, 10-page document that we have put into plain language and that we've tried to make look nice with a good layout and visuals and all that, and we'll send along a survey as well that asks for feedback. Is this easy to understand? Is there any way that we can make it better? Is the layout good? Is the design good, et cetera, et cetera? Individuals who participate in that are compensated, of course, for their time. And that's just, one small way that we're trying to make sure that every piece of information that reaches the hands of a patient or someone who's in a clinical trial, we've actually had, somebody who's like them review the material and, tell us if it is good or not. All right, so now getting to Lisa's point, we purposely sort of put this last, but okay, now you've learned a lot about clinical research and you think, okay, I'm ready to go potentially be a part of a trial. So how does that work? Finding trials, we'll talk about here on the next slide really quick, but first of all, let's talk about when people are found for trials, right? So recruitment for trials, and also what makes somebody eligible to be in a trial. Clinical trials recruit participants in a few different ways. Traditionally, that you may see advertisements in print, right? Either at the bus stop or at the train stop or on the bus or on the train, or you'll see it on a bulletin board in a community setting or a grocery store or something like that. Now there's a lot of also advertisement online. And in fact, our research shows, research that is publicly available, if you want to take a look, it's called CISCRP's Perception and Insights Study. Our research shows that most people now are learning about clinical trials online, whether that's an advertisement or they're searching for trials themselves. However, our research also shows that the way that people really want to learn about trials is through their doctors. And that usually does not happen. It's very important to keep that in mind. Some folks may think, well, if clinical research is right for me, my doctor or a doctor will talk to me about it. Unfortunately, that's not what we see. We see more so that patients and their families have to advocate for themselves. And in fact, they may be the ones to begin the conversation about clinical research with a doctor or even a specialist, even somebody who has a condition or disease, and they're being treated by a doctor who clinical trial options, unless they themselves are a researcher. And so those researchers, so doctors who do clinical research, as opposed to doctors who just treat people, two very different things, oftentimes, those doctors that actually do research, they might be the ones that reach out, right? They may be the ones that, if you happen to have that doctor, they may tell you about clinical research. Or if you go to that hospital may have those doctors there that are doing research. So big university hospitals, for example, and large hospital systems oftentimes do conduct research. And that research, by the way, is not always research with pharmaceutical companies. That may be, smaller studies that the doctor is doing on their own because they have some very specific sort of narrow health question that they want to answer. And it may be about a particular treatment that either is already approved for that particular disease or it's approved for a different disease. And they think, well, maybe it's going to help these folks. And so there are trials that are initiated by those doctors at those hospitals that are not necessarily what we call industry or pharmaceutical company trials. Just a little bit to keep in mind there.
Can I jump in there?
Yes,
and
Allison,
add,
please do.
add something from the patient perspective on this,
Yeah.
on the topic of doctors?
Mm-hmm.
I have the personal policy of always asking my provider about clinical trials. Every chance you get, I think you should ask them too. Ask them what they know. Ask what they think. Ask what's available for your condition if you have one, or even what you might participate in as a healthy volunteer. Whether they actually know anything or not, and can guide you in the right direction and offer insights and recommendations or not, your inquiring sends a clear message that not only should they know something, but that more patients are going to be holding them accountable for keeping up with the latest advances, and that you personally, as a minority patient especially, are not willing to settle for the status quo, by golly. Okay. It is unfortunately the norm that providers do not routinely discuss clinical trials as options with patients and their caregivers. In all of the years that I've personally participated in clinical trials, it was never, ever because a doctor suggested it to me. Not once has a doctor even brought the subject up with me. And that includes minority doctors too. But you know what? I bring it up. You bet it. You better believe it. And regardless of where that conversation leads you, there are other options. CISCRP, for example, is one place to find information about participating in clinical trials. And I participate as well.
Yes.
That is the organization, that is.
Right. So, and I think that's a really great point. Allison, if everybody would advocate for themselves like you do, we would have a different world, right? But unfortunately, that is sort of the situation oftentimes with clinical trials, is you may need to actually educate yourself more so. You may end up being the one that's telling your doctor, like, no, actually, that's not the way that it is.
Right.
It happens. Right. And so, the information that we've shared on these slides and some other resources, including iParticipate, including CISCRP's website, it has a lot of information that hopefully would help someone as they're getting started, as they're learning about clinical trials. And so 2 things that I'll touch on here real quick, and then hopefully we can just get to some open discussion. Once you're ready to actually, be a part of a trial, you found a trial even. Now there's the process of finding out if you're eligible. And so eligibility criteria are those things that I was talking about earlier, as far as, there's sort of has been restrictions on who can be in trials and who can't. These are there for good reason. Right? It's to make sure that the right people are going into these trials. It's to make sure that also, because clinical trials are meant to be highly controlled environment, meaning they can scientifically and statistically analyze and say with, good confidence, yes, it was this treatment that actually made this person better, right? Rather than some other factors that we don't know about. In order for that to happen, there does need to be consistency in terms of who is actually in the trial. And so the eligibility criteria are lists of essentially requirements, either things that people need to have, a particular type of condition, or things that they cannot have. And sometimes that means, you cannot have had a certain kind of treatment before. It could also be that you have had certain kind of treatment before and it didn't work for you, right? So that is a critical part in this critical step in the process of trying to be in a trial. Is there's a list of eligibility criteria, and the site staff, the nurses, the coordinators that are working on the trial will be the ones that assess that for you. However, the information about what the eligibility criteria are is supposed to be made publicly available, and oftentimes it is. And I'll tell you one of the sites that you can find it on. The problem is it's often very scientific and oftentimes very difficult to understand. So I'm guessing those are some of the questions that Allison would typically be asking them, of like, so why? What are you talking about? Why is, things you may need to do that. It's not always easy.
Benjamin,
Go ahead.
you brought up a very good point about the eligibility, and you presented it from a researcher's point of view. You didn't present it like a patient, because eligibility criteria sometimes, and this is part of what the FDA is looking at, it's not real world criteria.
That's right.
So it's not. So I appreciate what you just shared in terms of what a doctor may say or what this is scientifically, but it is not. It's a barrier. It's a barrier
huge barrier
for
that they
getting.
build in.
It is.
It's a barrier. So I want our group to understand that while eligibility and what will keep you in, will let you in, keeps you out. So
that's right.
So it's just something that is required, as he stated up front, that is necessary to get the results that you want, but it's not actually
Realistic.
not always realistic and fair.
It's not always realistic, and it does end up being a barrier, particularly for, again, individuals from those communities who have not been invited into clinical trials. And Allison and I were talking about this. Sometimes it probably is intentional, and it is one of the things that the FDA has said in their diversity guidance, that should try not to do that anymore. Try to be more open. Don't have so many restrictions. Don't have so many things that don't let people in. But I think change is going to be a little bit slower on that. But it's okay. I think what I always tell all researchers is, you guys are smart. You're going to figure out a way to do this and make it work. And if you don't, it's because you're not trying.
Boom. There you go.
Yeah.
Mic drop. Try harder.
Yeah.
That's right.
So team, I want to make sure though that the team on here gets to ask some questions if they have them, as we I'll interject and think of what I think you might be thinking, but please raise your hand now, and where to find the clinical trials and all of that is important. But before we get to that,
we have a whole brochure on how to find a clinical trial. So hopefully, I think it's a good brochure. It's pretty, step-by-step instructions. It gives you a lot of the different sort of considerations, and it even gives you other resources, like the list of questions that you might ask when you find a trial. So, hopefully we don't have to go through that too much here. But also, I will say CISCRP helps people find trials, and we have absolutely no affiliation with any research, study or anything like that. You tell us what condition you may have, or the loved one that you're searching for. Search clinicaltrials.org, and you tell us where you live, where you might be willing to travel, and we'll just send you a list of potential trials. And if that list isn't good for you, you tell us this list isn't good for me, and we'll do it again. And it's completely free. So if you don't want to do it yourself, we'll do it for you.
We do the same thing as well.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
We'll walk you through the process and hold your hand and make calls for
Which is
you.
even better. Which is
well.
even better. Yeah. Some
That's
folks
awesome.
some folks want that.
Yeah.
Some folks don't just want a list. They say, no, I want to learn how to do it, and I also want you to help me call and talk to the researchers, and that's such a great resource as well.
Yeah, we're all about trying to get rid of as many barriers as possible.
So I have our first question, which is an excellent question. How do you find out about the results of a clinical trial that you participated in?
Well,
That is an excellent question. That is an excellent question. So ideally, the research sponsor, about 1 year after the trial is over, because it takes a while for them to collect the data, analyze the data, and then put it out. But ideally, once they put that the results out, they've also put it into a plain language summary. Those are the things that CISCRP helps to create. Plain language summaries are required for any trial that happens in the European Union. It's not a requirement here in the United States. The Office of Health and Human Services has neglected, I will say, to make it a requirement, even though it has been something on the agenda for a while. So, having said that, it is a requirement to post the results of the trial in general, the data points, pretty much. That would be on clinicaltrials.gov. Clinicaltrials.gov is also where you can find trials. But so especially if you have gone through the trial, you know sort of the identifier number, the NCT number, then you can just put that into clinicaltrials.gov, and then you go to the results tab and you see the results there. But again, it's very technical. It's a very scientific presentation of the results. So if there's not a plain language summary and there's not an organization like patient advocacy organization that's going there and taking that information and packaging it nicely so that, you know, anybody can understand it, or most people can understand it, then it's going to be hard to access.
Great.
Yep.
Thanks, Julia.
It was
Anybody
excellent.
else? Yeah, great question.
So while maybe somebody else is going on, I'll say another piece of knowing results and something that everybody should advocate for if you do take part in a trial is finding out your individual results. So I was just talking about the aggregate results. That means the overall results of the trial. That's everybody who's in the trial. They put all that data together. They take the averages and whatever other kind of statistical methods they use. But you should absolutely feel like you can ask for your individual results. I would ask before you agree to participate, am I going to get my individual results? And I would ask multiple mentoring as well. Some sponsors will, some research sponsors, researchers, they will of course give you, you know, sort of any really critical findings, something in your lab results or something that really might impact your health. They're sort of required to tell you that type of stuff. But as far as just, hey, here's all the data that we got from you in this trial, not everybody's giving that back right now. And you may not even know what you took during the trial. So that you should also ask about. Are you going to tell me what I'm taking in this trial, or am I going to be completely blinded to it? That's another thing that is coming about as a change, and that everybody should feel 100% entitled to ask about.
Reverend Waddy?
Well, yeah, I was just thinking with Julia's question, and then hearing this response, I would think, and then maybe I'm maybe totally off base with this, but I'm thinking that one of the reasons you would want to get in a study on a particular issue is so that you can get more aggregate information on that issue. And so if you participate and you don't really get, I'm not necessarily talking about the deep technical stuff, but if you don't get enough general information, or even enough information about what happened to you as a part of this study, you know, it doesn't seem like I'm getting much out of it. I could be wrong.
No, you're not wrong at all, Reverend Ronnie. You're so absolutely on point with it, because, you know, a lot of the time when people participate in a trial, they know that it's for altruistic reasons. You know that, you know, this trial may not help me. It may not help my health, but I want to know that I am helping, you know, future. I'm helping people in my community in 5 years from now, 10 years from now, my children, my grandchildren, my nephews, nieces, whatever. And when you don't get that information back, you feel like maybe that didn't happen, and B, you don't know if it happened.
Yeah.
Allison, do you have anything to add there?
no, I agree. That should be part of the entitlement process, that we should know what that information looks like so that we can have a clearer picture of our own health journey, as well as what lays ahead
Mm-hmm.
for our family, for our descendants.
Agreed.
You know, we need to be able to discuss these things and not keep secrets within our families about things that we have encountered or experienced. And we need some specificity around that. And I think clinical trials should add to that tapestry. Absolutely.
So there's a question in the chat that is asking, when you are in a trial that is offering a placebo, when are you informed? Are you informed? And how do you know that in that clinical trial is what's being asked?
Allison, do you want to take this?
I will definitely put some of my insights in there. So we do not know in advance whether we're getting the placebo or not, but the informed consent will say, you may, in this study, be getting the placebo. But in order to safeguard scientific integrity and not bias the results, they don't want people to know in advance, right? At the end, you will have access to that information. You don't always get it, but it's supposed to be designed in such a way that you do know at the end, oh, that was a placebo. I can tell you there were times when I could tell just based on how I was feeling that I had a placebo versus, for instance, in a migraine study. I assumed I was on placebo because my migraine was raging. It didn't have a dent. Didn't make a dent.
Yeah.
And so, and I'm not sure in that particular instance whether I was on a placebo or not, because we never got results.
Right. And you should definitely. So, unblinding. When I said unblinding, that's what I meant. Sorry for using a technical term without explaining it. So blinding is when in a trial, the participants don't necessarily know which treatment they're receiving, whether it's a placebo or a different kind of treatment. Sometimes also the researchers themselves are blinded. That's called double blinding. So not the doctor and the nurses who are actually giving you the treatment don't know either. And that's, again, so they are not biasing the results. Again, clinical trials is meant to be extremely controlled environments so that, you know, again, you can feel like, yes, we know for sure. We're not guessing that this treatment works and is safe. We know for sure. Having said that, I think it's important also to keep in mind that not every trial uses a placebo. And not every trial is blinded. Now, if a trial is not blinded, then there's not going to be a placebo. That sort of takes away the whole point of it. But sometimes in a trial, you have different treatment arms. And so you may receive the current treatment that's approved, that's called the standard of care. And then the other folks who are also in the trial may be receiving, or some other folks who are also in the trial may be receiving the new treatment, the investigational treatment, the drug that the company is studying, right? So in cases where patients need a treatment, they will not be given placebo. That doesn't happen.
For ethical reasons. They're not allowed
for obvious reasons, obvious and ethical
Yeah.
reasons. Yeah. So that's really important to keep in mind. You know, placebo is only going to be used when the researchers and the ethics committees who review the trial and the FDA or whatever government agency is reviewing the plans of the trial, only if they all agree that this is not going to cause more harm, you know, to these individuals if they get placebo.
Right.
There's a question, are we past clinical trials for peanut allergies? That's a very specific question about specific trials, but it's a good question. I mean, you know, are we still, it to me, yeah, it provides me with another, just because we know something, are we still studying something? That's what that question says to me.
And the
Right.
short answer would be yes, but I can't say with any certainty without actually doing a search on peanut allergy studies as to what's going on. But I would imagine it's ongoing. Yeah.
Oh, this is a great exercise.
Why don't we do this
Taking
real
you to
quick?
clinicaltrials.org.
Yeah.
Yeah, and search.
So we'll go to clinicaltrials.gov. This is the government database where anybody who's conducting a trial in the United States has to put on here hey, we're doing this trial, here's where it is, here's the information
By
about this
law.
trial. Yeah, by law. And then after the trial, again, by law, they do have to put the results here. But again, those are the results that are more technical. It's just like like a scientific report. It's just numbers. But anyways, so you can go here to try and find trials. And so under conditions or diseases, we can put in peanut allergy. And hey, look at that. That's the first thing that pops up. So you're not the only person that's asking that question. And yeah, so
What does it
from
say up at the top?
here you
Where it gives a number.
the U.S. government the number of results. There are 169 studies.
studies.
Right. Now, not all of these are necessarily ongoing. These are just all the studies that have happened and that have been posted here. Some of them are ongoing though, and that's the ones that say recruiting.
And yeah,
so you can apply
specify.
filters over here on the left-hand side. Yeah. So there's 24 that are recruiting. There's 3 that are not yet recruiting, which means the sponsor or the researcher just wants to put it out there that, hey, I'm going to do this trial, but I'm not ready to open it up yet. So don't come knocking quite yet. You see that there's 89 trials that have been completed, 13 trials that were terminated, which means the study ended before it was supposed to end. So let's just look at this real quick. Recruiting. This trial, this is supposed to be the short title that hopefully gives you some information. Study of efficacy, which efficacy means we want to know if this treatment actually works, if it actually helps. Safety, which they always look at in every trial. Tolerability, which essentially means
What kind of
tolerability
did you have?
can you take this without being too uncomfortable?
Yeah.
Right, without having too many side effects. That's what tolerability is. And you can see these are just some of the locations where it's taking place. And then if you click on this, either show more locations or you click here, it'll take you to the page specific to that trial. Then you get more information. You can see here's the company that's doing it, Novartis. They're a large pharma company. It'll tell you when this posting was made. They'll give you the study overview, which again, not always in simple terms, unfortunately. Particularly now, you get into the detailed description. This is just a bunch of jargon, really, unfortunately. But having said that, it does tell you what the drug is. And here it tells you also that, yes, there is a placebo. And in here, if it says blinded, so you see investigator and participant blinded, that means it's a double-blind trial. It means neither the participants nor the doctor or the nurses are going to know what treatment people are receiving. Placebo controlled. So there will be a placebo and then there will be the study drug, which is remibrutinib.
I want to know who
Anyways,
gets
then down here you get to your location, you have contact information, etc., etc. Oh,
So there's DC.
this was a nice exercise. I really
That
appreciate the
was
question.
good. That was a great question.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. I didn't see anything else in the chat for a question. We've kept our